Hi everyone, I'm Susan Birch and welcome to another episode of The Health Detective. And I'm very excited today to be talking to Marty Kendall. Marty is a civil engineer from Brisbane, Australia, and he has a wife with type 1 diabetes. And so quite a few years ago, he decided to figure out how to improve the health of his family and started analysing what determines an optimal nutrition diet. And he's got a great blog and we'll share all that info with you. So Marty, thanks for coming along and so excited to have you here.
Always love chatting about this stuff. So thanks for having me.
Yeah. So how about if you just start telling us a little bit about your story and how you got into being one of the thought leaders in this nutrition space?
Yeah, wow, thank you. That's my goal, but all started 20 years ago. Met Monica, who happens to have type 1 diabetes. She knew very little about, after having diabetes for a long time, about how to manage it or what to do, and the information was quite poor, and I just kept asking questions that she didn't know the answers to. And I suppose then all of a sudden you say, let's have children, and her sister, who's a doctor, said you should try and get your blood sugars under control. So it got serious then, diabetes complications. And so it's very personally motivated. We've got two wonderful, amazing kids. Our son, Mikey, who's 16, got diagnosed with type 1, unfortunately, in December. But, that's the dice you roll with an autoimmune disease. So, yeah, definitely personally motivated. And I've just since then continued to try and understand, first starting with a food insulin index and trying to understand what foods raise blood sugars and require more insulin, and just to help Monty get off that blood sugar roller coaster. Because when you have to inject a lot of insulin, your blood sugars come crashing down, you feel poorly, you eat poorly again if you're injecting too much insulin. But then I sort of realized that, to minimize the short-term insulin demand, you needed to basically avoid all carbs and even protein, which requires insulin in the short term. And I realized that, hey, that's a very nutrient poor diet. And there was Joel Furman had been doing his Andy index for a while, and then Matt Lalonde was out there talking about nutrient density and quantifying things. And he sort of Matt did some amazing work in a few weeks, but sort of left it there. And I sort of picked it up and said, hey, I can do this and quantify it. And not just for people with diabetes, but for everybody, to say, how do we get the most nutrients per calorie? And then later on, I added satiety, and we've amassed through Nutrient Optimizer this database of 125,000 days of data from 35,000 people who eat all different ways. And you can just, from an agnostic, data-driven approach, say, how do people eat who eat less? What are the characteristics in terms of macros, but also micronutrients? And that's been just, went, wow, this is a gold mine of data, and I have to keep digging because it's really important. The diabetes epidemic is going to suffocate us and the world. So it's a fun little hobby that sort of took over my life. So here we are talking to Susan in New Zealand.
Well, you're an engineer, so I guess you've got all those skills and you've got that analytical brain, and you've got, so you just love pulling all that data together and investigating. But I take your point. We've got a whole society of people who are overfed.
Yep. And undernourished.
And undernourished, and that's been something I've been talking about. It feels like just about my whole life.
It's a worthy quest, though.
Yeah, it is a worthy quest. And we're just chatting quickly before we started recording about the focus on macronutrients and the focus on calories in diet. And whereas I think your approach and my approach to some extent is, if we really focus on the nutrients we want out of our diet, the rest of it takes care of itself.
Yeah, totally. And nutrients to a lot of people just means what comes in those pills or those added to your food. But when you get all the nutrients that you need from the food you eat, your body goes, yeah, that's what I needed. I've had enough. I've got the amino acids, I've got the protein, I've got the fat, I've got the carbs for energy, I've got the potassium and sodium and calcium and magnesium and all the B vitamins and omega-3, and I've got what I need without excess energy. I'm just going to get on with my life and forget about food rather than being consumed with food. But Rabenheimer and Simpson have done some amazing work in the protein leverage hypothesis and showed that all organisms eat until they get enough protein. And if you're not getting enough protein per calorie, per unit of energy, however you want to term that, we just keep on eating. And in the current food environment, that seems to be the major driver of why we keep eating. But my analysis has showed that it's not just the amino acids, the protein, but it's also the micronutrients, and get a statistically significant satiety craving response to especially potassium, sodium, calcium, B2, and all these potentially other micronutrients. So if your body's craving a particular nutrient, not just amino acids, you're going to keep craving that and eating more until you satisfy that requirement. And yeah, that's really cool. The way in our Micros Masterclass, we guide people to fill in those gaps with nutrients from the food they eat and solve that equation. And then you see them going, I've lost interest in food. I don't want to eat anymore. And does anybody else have this problem? I'm eating so few calories and losing weight and I'm not hungry. And it's just like, yes, that's exactly how we designed it to work. So yeah, I just love that and want to keep guiding people towards that, but communicating that, people want to talk about fasting or macronutrients, you sort of have to take them through that journey to understand how the micronutrient puzzle is sort of the icing on the cake.
Well, I think of things like chocolate cravings, with magnesium as a, can be a classic example, but there are so many other examples out there. And you've taken lots of people through your program very successfully, so people can just check you out for all the success stories that you have.
Yeah, it just keeps working every time. People want the magic pill and the magic fasting and the magic what not to eat, or the magic I'm gonna stabilize my blood sugars by adding fat, clothing my carbs with fat is the current thing to tame my CGM and get a flatline CGM. And it just doesn't work. Your body needs nutrients without too much energy. And once you get that, once you solve that, it's your body gets on with life and thrives.
So you talked about you've developed this nutrient satiety ratio. Yep. So do you want to talk a bit about that? What's involved in that? How you work that out?
Yeah. So the first, as I mentioned, like when you look at the food insulin index and do a regression through that, you can understand, how protein, carbs, fat, fiber, fructose, etc., all influence how much insulin you require. But if you take that to the nth extreme, you're just eating butter and olive oil, and you're not going to get the nutrients you need. And I suppose I've come on a journey from understanding what insulin actually does, and insulin's not really the center as much as I've thought that the keto world has sort of gone insulin bad, insulin toxicity bad, we have to avoid insulin toxicity. But the real fundamental problem, as Ted Naiman talks about, is energy toxicity. You've only got more insulin in your body because you're trying to hold back too much stored energy in your body, and insulin rises to, it's a anabolic hormone, but it's mainly an anti-catabolic hormone, which really just means that your body, it stops your body from breaking down. If my son or my wife stop taking insulin, they'd disintegrate into their bloodstream and they'd be peeing out of the glucose and fat, and the ketones would be high and the free fatty acids would be high and the blood glucose would be through the roof. So that's what insulin does. It just holds back the stored energy. So rather than trying to control insulin, I realized the biggest thing was how do you control satiety so we don't keep eating. So moving on from that, looked at macronutrients with MyFitnessPal data and found that protein, percentage has the most dominant effect on satiety, and fat and carbs are sort of similar. But then once we got the chronometer data out of Nutrient Optimizer, we could dive into all the micronutrients as well. And there's definitely a similar sort of relationship, similar to protein percentage, with protein, as we eat a higher percentage of protein, we go from 15 to 55% protein, we reduce our calorie intake by 55%, which is massive, and you only need to shift a little bit to get sustainable fat loss. But you see a similar thing with pretty much every nutrient, to the point where the data is sort of polluted by supplements of all these B vitamins. And as people are just dumping in supplements into their food, they end up eating more of that fortified garbage, or believing that they've got insurance because they're getting their vitamins from a pill. But yeah, you see that same trend as you get more potassium per calorie, you eat less. As you get more sodium per calorie, you eat less. So I've sort of tried to define the point at which, like an optimal nutrient intake, at which we tend to be satiated from the food we eat. You don't want to have to supplement to get that. So we've sort of defined an optimal nutrient intake for all 34 essential nutrients. And some people may be getting plenty of potassium or sodium, and there's other nutrients that they need to target. So once you work out what nutrients you need to target, then you just pursue them from your diet, and your body goes, yeah, that's what I needed, and I'm happy not to keep eating.
Very interesting. I think, I know I started focusing on insulin back in 1998 was when I kind of my brainwave about insulin, or my light bulb moment about insulin. But then as you learn and look into insulin, it's so important for transporting so many of these nutrients into cells. So it's not just about carbohydrates or sugar. And when you're insulin resistant, then you're not able to get these nutrients into cells as well. And so that's that's another sort of downfall of insulin resistance.
It's interesting, like in a healthy person, you've got GLUT1 receptors. Don Lehman was talking to you about this. I was listening to the podcast last night. The GLUT1 receptor uses non-insulin mediated glucose uptake, which means that basically if your cell is depleted of glucose because you've exercised and you need more glucose into the cell, it'll just basically transfer straight into the cell without insulin trying to push it in. It's only when you get this energy toxicity state that the insulin, the pancreas, is trying to push glucose back into storage. But it's really, what insulin is really doing is just holding your body. You've got a bunch of fat and glucose stored in your body, in your liver particularly, and insulin is like the dam wall that raises the dam wall. The more stored energy you've got, the more insulin you need to hold back your energy in storage. So, the way to reduce your insulin is to reduce the amount of water you've got sitting behind the dam wall. And focusing on insulin leads you to minimizing carbohydrate. And, I've eliminated the potato chips, and I'm going to eliminate the potatoes, and there's still fiber in my lettuce, so I'm going to eliminate that. And I can't eat spinach because that's got carbohydrate too. And you just take it to this extreme, and you end up eating bulletproof coffee or some other thing, believing that doesn't trigger insulin. Well, from a satiety perspective, we see that reducing carbs non-fiber carbs from 45% to about 15% gives you a really nice satiety response. But taking it even lower than that, you actually end up eating more, potentially, because you get a more energy dense diet, and maybe now you're just eating protein and fat, and the fat is easy to overeat as well.
And I think that's one of the things I've seen with the keto diet is people just really overeat fat. And
We're all told just eat fat to satiety. Steve Finney sat in my room right here, and when he came to Brisbane, we hung out, and I had a long chat to him about ketones and optimal ketosis and chasing ketones. I'm going, Steve, it just doesn't. People over time, their ketones drop as they become more metabolically healthy, and they don't have excess energy flowing into the bloodstream, whether that be glucose-free fatty acids or ketones. And to load in more fat, believing that you can chase this optimal ketosis, you just end up with energy toxicity unless, so yeah, anyway, that's a whole rabbit hole rant that I could go on for ages.
But perhaps you could just explain what you mean about energy. I think people would be interested in that, because I'm not sure that people really have quite yet grasped the nutrient side of the equation and the energy side of the equation. And, that's what you've just been talking about. But.
Yeah, I mean, energy balance is a thing. It's a real thing in physics, that energy is not created or destroyed, it just changes form. And, that is a physical reality. And calories are sort of the best way we have to measure that. But to just count calories, to go, well, I'm eating 3,000 calories worth of pizza and donuts a day, so I'm going to try and cut that to 1,500, so I'll be good. It doesn't work, because if you change how much you eat of the same old crap that you're eating before, your body's going to go, I'm not getting enough nutrients. I need to eat more. So you'll eat to satiety. You'll be good for a few days, maybe a week, maybe 2 weeks if you're really disciplined. And then it'll be, I can't track my food anymore. This is garbage. And I'm face down in the peanut butter, or that's my go-to. The Pix peanut butter from New Zealand is evilly good. We were introduced to that, and that's my go-to. I've asked my wife to stop buying it, because, when I've worked out that's what I go for. But yeah, so to change how much you eat, you need to modify what you eat. And energy in our diet, you can convert protein to energy. You can, through gluconeogenesis, convert protein to ATP, but it's a really intensive process. And your body goes, yeah, you've eaten all that chicken breast and egg white and whatever, but for me it's kangaroo, which is a really lean meat. Then your body goes, hey, I've got this protein, but I can't convert it to energy. It's really hard work. How about the, peanut butter and fat and carbs and butter and cheese and everything else, keto or whatever? Give me that energy, because it's a whole lot easier to convert to ATP to use in my body. So your body doesn't really convert protein to energy easily or very often. And therefore, that's why we crave those other foods, because your body just says, hey, I can't convert this to energy easily, give me the other foods. So that's where, if you prioritize protein, give your body enough protein, all the protein it needs, and just try to dial back the fat and the carbs, which are the easy forms of energy that have got a low dietary induced thermogenesis, that the energy from your non-fiber carbs and your fat is much more easily converted to ATP in your body. So that's sort of the energy. You need to change your macros and micros to give your body what it needs without the excess energy that's easily accessible from fat and non-fiber carbs.
So have you got a number for the fat percentage?
Similar, like I mentioned before, satiety increases when we go from 45% non-fiber carbs to about 15 to 20% carbs. So if we reduce from pizza and donuts to a low carb diet with lots of fiber and veggies, we get a similar response when we go from maybe 80% to 40 or 35% fat. Like, we don't see a big improved satiety when you go very, very low fat, because fat comes with protein generally. So trying to get your fat really, really low is not useful particularly.
And do you look at the the order that the oxidative priority of,
that's completely key. Oxidative priority is central to my understanding of how we use energy, and it's basically ketones, alcohol have to be burned off first because there's no room to store them. You've got some room to store glucose in your body. It's not as explosive a fuel as ketones and alcohol, but it has to be, that's what you use for explosive energy. Then you've got your fat, which you've got a massive storage vessel all over your body, and you can store hundreds of thousands of calories worth of fat energy, and your body likes to use that energy. It likes to store that energy for another time when winter actually comes. But we're always loading in alcohol, and a few years ago it was proven exogenous ketones, and most people are eating more carbohydrate than they need and overfilling their glucose fuel tank, and all that energy sort of backs up in the system. So you have to burn off the alcohol, the ketones, the excess glucose before you can actually access your body fat. So, and then if you're eating too much dietary fat, you're not going to access your body fat either.
Yeah, because you just don't need to burn it, and then you've got that insulin circulating around saying, like hold that water back behind that dam.
And because your body fat is going up and up and up, you just need more and more insulin to hold the dam floodgates back,
and so we end up in this vicious cycle. So you were talking about supplements, and they're not the best way to get your nutrients. So how do people get a really nutrient dense diet? And I think we all know about so we've got the micronutrients, which are our vitamins and minerals, but then with our minerals we've kind of got macro minerals and micro minerals. And I see people getting pretty much lots of macro minerals. Maybe, I think magnesium is maybe one that's pretty suspect. But the micro minerals as well, and the importance for them to be in the right relationships and ratios with each other.
Yeah, that's all a fascinating rabbit hole that to be honest, we don't know a lot about the ratios. And I did a post recently on the micronutrient ratios, and potassium and sodium have to be basically in balance, and they're the potassium, sodium, calcium are the macro minerals that we see the biggest satiety response to. And I think a lot of people are getting enough sodium in their diet, especially if they're eating junk food. If they go to a unprocessed diet and not salting to taste, they may not be getting enough sodium. But the big one is potassium that people aren't getting enough of. And then calcium there seems to be a really powerful satiety response to calcium, because people are potentially not getting enough calcium in their diet. When it comes to the other ones, like the data doesn't show as big a response to it, like copper and manganese and all these sort of things, whether that's because the data is not reported as consistently and accurately for the smaller minerals. But at the same time, if you're eating, like I was in New Zealand, your food is absolutely incredible. These happy cows roaming on green grass in beautiful pastures, and everything tastes larger than life because it's grown in an ecosystem that is vibrant and healthy and regenerative and alive. And that's, your food should taste amazing because it's got all the nutrients it needs in it, because it comes from a healthy ecosystem. And that's what the modern monocrop agriculture system is eroding very, very quickly, literally, with the soil and the microbial diversity and the minerals and everything else that's in the soil is just depleting, and we're just loading in more and more non-renewable energy from fossil fuel fertilizers. And they're getting harder to find these days, and international events make all those things more costly. So it's going to be interesting to see how the lack of ability to keep on just dumping energy into monocrop agriculture to produce cheap energy with very little nutrients. It's going to be, hopefully, the world will look like New Zealand before too long, with everything's green and happy and vibrant again.
Well, we're heading in the other direction. We've got Impossible Foods over here doing, doing their huge marketing programs, and, veganism is becoming very popular, and our happy, healthy cows, apparently we shouldn't have those anymore.
They're evil. Yeah.
Yeah, they're evil. And our green grass, we're supposed to replace our green grass with big greenhouses and factories to produce dairy products instead of,
Which is absolutely tragic. The whole alignment between the plant-based narrative and, I grew up as a Seventh-day Adventist and they've been very instrumental in the nutrition scene over the last 50 years or so, influencing the dietary guidelines. It's a belief-based system, and then you've got they were really vegetarian when I was a kid, but now they've aligned themselves with the vegan philosophy, which aligns really nicely with big agriculture, profit-making big food, because everything you see in the centre aisles of your supermarket is refined starches, grains, sugars, and industrial vegetable oils all thrown together, which is just, because you've dumped in that pure energy from the fertilizers, which comes from non-renewable gas. It's highly profitable. So, the mixture of all those is a very profitable narrative. So, which is hard to combat. Hopefully I'd love to see the subsidies for the monocrop agriculture move to say, hey, let's reward people who are regenerating the environment and using less non-renewable energy into their system. And to do that, you're going to have animals and plants all come back together to some extent to actually create a vibrant ecosystem that can survive the next 100 years.
Back to our roots, where we all evolved together. And
we've created a fascinating problem by 10,000 years ago. We just went, hey, we can grow agriculture and we can just take over more land with agriculture, and we can feed more people, and we can have a little bit more energy than we actually need, and we can, we don't starve, and we can have more babies. And then, the Green Revolution came along in the 50s and 60s, and we discovered how to optimize that on steroids with fertilizers and non-renewable gas fertilizer-based energy into our food system, and populations just exploded because of that pillaging of non-renewable energy that can't continue forever. So eventually we've got to change course, whether that's sooner than later.
We're hoping it'll be sooner, but
eventually it's got to come crashing down. We can't keep on growing more people with bigger people and bigger population that are
and the healthcare costs, and
healthcare costs are going to kill us.
Healthcare costs are just humongous. And then all these foods are fortified, and we pick up all these things in the center island of the supermarket, and they don't have the mineral and the mineral balance and the vitamin balance that we need. And they might add in some B12, and they might add in some iron, and there's probably a bit of potassium and maybe a bit of calcium. But there's so much more missing,
and you don't get them in the balance that your body understands what to do with. And I interviewed Mark Schatzker, who wrote The End of Craving. He's done some fascinating writing, and based off the work of Dana Small, just looking at our body's response to food. And when our food doesn't contain what we think it's going to contain, we just eat more of it. So if you sort of trick your body to say that tastes like blah, but wait up, it doesn't actually contain those nutrients that should be in it. So I'm going to be more risk adverse and eat a little bit more. So if you just keep trying to trick your body with colors and flavors and you're going to keep on eating more. And you look at the fortification, his book fascinatingly highlights that they in the 60s, they realized that the pigs weren't growing as quickly just on the refined grains, so that they had to put them out on pasture or give them alfalfa, the green stuff, to get the vitamins and minerals that they needed. But then they went, hey, well, if we add a few B vitamins to their refined grain, we can keep them in captivity, in the shade, all bunched up, less pasture, they grow quicker, and they keep eating this pig chow, and we can sell them sooner, they're bigger, we pay less, and we don't have to feed them as much, we make more profit. And then that became a big thing in agriculture. And then 5 or 10 years later, you see the human food fortification limits double, and you see the fortification of our food from the 70s just ramped up. And it seems that effectively humans, because they've got that smattering of fortified B vitamins, folate, B9, iron, whatever, we don't lose interest in those foods anymore, because they contain a few of the fortified nutrients that our body needs. So we don't go, this cereal tastes like crap, I'm going to go eat some meat and veggies and seafood, which actually contain those nutrients and provide satiety. We just keep on chowing down this coloured, flavoured breakfast cereal that's got all these amazing nutrients on the label, said packed with nutrients, but they're all synthetic with no protein, no fibre to provide satiety.
And, it's interesting, you mentioned copper earlier, and then, just talking about iron, I've been diving down a bit of a deep hole trying to figure out why so many women are iron deficient despite iron infusions and despite, iron supplements. And, it ended up coming back to copper. And then I found, unless we've got copper in balance, so I forget how much iron we have. It's like a 20-to-1 ratio, or probably maybe higher than that with copper. But if we don't have enough copper, iron gets bound in all our tissues, and we need copper, and we need retinol, vitamin A, and for the ceruloplasmin enzyme. Which then transports the copper around, which then helps release the iron back into circulation.
It's fascinating.
Yeah. And so I find now that trying to test, because, the tests are not that reliable. They're damn hard to get. The GPs go, "Oh, you're mad, go away." So trying to test is quite difficult, and you've got to be so careful with all those elements. You don't want to over-supplement, but I'm finding some supplementation is really helping, and people's iron stores are starting to recover.
Yeah, that's really interesting. One thing, some people have excess iron. A lot of people don't have enough iron, low ferritin in their blood. But Paul Mason, I don't know whether you've seen his work on iron, sort of indicates that because we've got so much inflammation, like you said, the iron is being bound up, and
so it's ending up in our tissues. So the iron's in our tissues, and then iron is an acute phase reactant. So so it binds with the oxygen. Outside our body, it causes rust. Inside our body, it causes inflammation.
It's fascinating. In terms of iron in the food system, it's just gone up and up and up, because people have continued to fortify more and more and more. But we're not, for various reasons, like you said, potentially because we're not getting enough of the other micro minerals to complement it. We're just getting the iron and the folate and at massive levels, without the balance of the other nutrients that would occur in the beautiful New Zealand South Island, where you've got amazing food growing naturally.
And then
never tasted food as good as New Zealand, South Island, and Vanuatu.
That's great. That's a great advertisement for New Zealand food.
Yeah, it's incredible.
Yeah, we are. I mean, we are so blessed. We have so much great food and potential for great food, and it's just such a shame that we have resorted to the typical Western diet of all this packaged stuff. all these seed
It's just
oils.
easy and profitable. And we like to eat those foods, so we get sold the foods we like to eat. So you could say it's big food, or big food are preying on us, but at the same time, we're just eating the foods that give us that super additive dopamine hit from fat and carbs together that never occurred in nature. So we just go, oh, these foods are great. Give me another donut.
Exactly. Well, I know if I eat them, you want more. You
Yeah.
have that. You have those first couple of chippies, and then okay.
Yeah, and that's really like the secret. That's really the secret of satiety, is to avoid foods that are a combo of fat and carbs together, that are basically a potato chip that's got starch and oil combined in a ratio that never occurred in nature, that fills both a fat and carb fuel tanks at the same time. We can eat more of them. You get a dopamine hit from carbs, you get a dopamine hit from fat. And when you eat them together, you get this extra dopamine hit, and then you come down from that dopamine, you get a dopamine deficit, and you want more, just like scrolling Instagram or Facebook and Netflix. You get the same dopamine deficiency and you want more.
And isn't it interesting, because you sit there with your steak and your fat and your salad, and you eat that, and you push your plate away and you go, I'm so full, I couldn't eat another bite. And then
and I'm going to get on with my day until I'm actually hungry again.
But then the dessert menu comes round.
We're all human.
That piece of cheesecake sounds so delicious. And all of a sudden, I think that has something to do with like palate fatigue as well. I think, but then you eat that, and then you start getting that dopamine hit, and you're so full, but you think, well, I could just have another spoonful or another little piece. It's kind of quite crazy.
Yeah. So most of the time we just need to prioritize foods that provide the protein and vitamins and minerals and omega-3 naturally, and not, the challenge is not to bring those foods home and not be exposed to those hyper palatable dessert foods all the time, because when we've got the opportunity, we'll take it.
Yeah, and just keep them as treats. It doesn't mean that we can't ever eat them, but and I think that's one of the things too, is that whole all or nothing. Like, if I have a treat, well, now I've been bad, now I've failed. I might as well give up. I might as well, instead of just saying, well, that was just one meal, there's another meal tomorrow. Let's just move on.
Yeah, in our challenges, we always have to hose people down and say, stop trying too hard, because what you're eating now is probably just about right for you. You just need to tweak it just a little bit to move, towards high nutrient density, a little bit less fat and carbs, and prioritize protein. It's not a matter of going, okay, I'm going to go on a protein spring modified fast with 60% protein for 2 years. You'll never survive, because you need some energy. You just need to tweak the balance in the direction you need to go, enough to make sustainable progress.
And that gets me thinking about hormones, particularly for women, and going through their cycles and things like that, because, there's that sort of 2-week period where you want a bit more energy. And
totally. I did a post on that of charted my wife's last 14 cycles of insulin, and to look at, because she needs more insulin after ovulation. So we have to bump up the basal rates by about 10%. But when you dig in,
is that independent of diet? Is that needing insulin independent diet?
Well, I think it's both. Can I pick D, all of the above? Because I think it's like what happens. I'm a male, but from my reading and my understanding, basically after ovulation, female body thinks it may be pregnant. So if you need to grow a new life, you need more energy, you need more protein, you need more nutrients, so that the cravings increase, and you go seek out those slightly more energy dense foods. If you're trying to be good, eventually you're downing a bar of chocolate and chippies, because you needed that energy, because your body's just saying, hey, we might be pregnant here. Let's increase the intake. So that the studies indicate that the cravings tend to be for protein, particularly animal protein, zinc, vitamin A, things that will grow a new fetus, and the calorie intake bumps up by about 5%. And then insulin seems to bump up by about 10%. So I think it's a combination of cravings, which increase intake, and insulin resistance at the same time for maybe 5 to 10 days after ovulation, and a couple of days before menses, the insulin drops, water weight starts to drop, menses starts. So if you want to diet hard, don't do it in those few days after ovulation when the cravings are mad. You can just go, well, I'm going to be gentle with myself, accept that I'm going to have higher blood sugars, higher cravings. And then outside of that period, you can be a bit more aggressive and focus on a higher nutrient density with less energy. But during that time, you need protein and a bit more energy, maybe 5 to 10% more calories.
And do you think it matters where those calories come from? Would you prefer to see them come from fat, or you don't think it matters if they come?
I think it's a bit of both. I mean, people argue back and forth about this, and there's arguments that, if your carbs are really, really low, then the serotonin is not going to be great. You need serotonin during that time to prevent depression and anxiety and etc. So I think if you're it's probably not the time to dial back your carbs even more, but if you're getting protein and not worrying quite as much about the energy from fat or carbs, still try to prioritize nutrient density, but allow yourself a bit more energy from fat or carbs, or a little bit of both. But downing the potato chips and the Oreos is probably a bad play. And the way to ward off those cravings is to prioritize, protein, nutrients with a little bit more natural energy.
Yeah, it's interesting that conversation around carbs and serotonin, because tryptophan is really the precursor to serotonin. Yep. So I don't know what the biological mechanism is, or whether it's just a for energy craving.
The best way to increase energy intake is just increase both carbs and fat, which allows you to eat more. So that's probably what the body is trying to do, is just increase cravings for both.
And then what about the metabolic effects of that, though? Like carbs and fat together, and you're sort of putting petrol on the fire, really.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at growing, anything that needs to grow needs more energy from carbs and fat. So in that window when you could be starting a new pregnancy, dialing in the carbs and fat rather than bring it back down is a good way to get a bit more energy. You only need a little bit more. It's not, let's chow down on the chippies, but and then the rest of the time you can be more intentional on the prioritizing the nutrients with less energy from carbs and fat. So it's just dialing that up and down throughout the cycle. You can work with the cycle, I think, and then you stop trying to be really, really good to the point that you end up binging, because the gooder you try to be, the better you try to be, the more likely you're going to end up
being a binge.
Yeah, and the binge is the mind game that you lose, because when you lose that mind game because you've tried too hard, people throw it all in and they go on a failure, and failed another diet, and it's like, you just tried too hard. You've got to acknowledge it. It's just a little bit at a time, make a little bit of progress and then recover, and make a little bit more progress and recover. It's like resistance training, or you don't run a marathon on the first day, you just do a little bit more each time.
And talking about training, what's your take on exercise during that cycle? Like more exercise, more intense exercise,
Yeah, I think generally
and ease up during
the advice is, you can probably endure more intense exercise earlier in the cycle, after menses sort of thing, and then after ovulation maybe go a little bit less intense. There's a lot of blogs and research around that, but it's a bit of an uncharted territory.
So much we don't know about it, isn't there? And what about for men? What about with testosterone?
Exercise, lift heavy, eat protein, get good sleep. That's the challenge for me. And don't over exercise is one thing I've found, because if you push it too hard all the time, you elevate cortisol and you don't sleep as well, and then you end up rebound binging on foods that aren't optimal. So for me recently, I've gone through a period of doing a lot of heavy lifting training, but the appetite's hard to manage at that point because your body's trying to grow. But if you can do more, I've been trying to focus on more long, slow. You talk to Phil Maffetone. He's incredible. The MAF method, keeping your heart rate under 180 minus your age, and just practicing burning fat. And if you can, that's gold, because if you can train your body to burn fat most of the time without needing to tap into glucose, I think your appetite's going to be much more stable, because you're not, intense exercise, your body pumps out glucose into your bloodstream, fuels that activity, your muscles use that glucose through non-insulin mediated glucose uptake, and then your glucose is crashed, and then once your glucose crashes, you're just raging appetite and eating poorly at that point. So I think if you find your appetite is your undoing, then let's dial back the intensity a little bit so you can manage your appetite after your exercise. It's
a real hard one for people to do that. They feel like they're going so slow and they have to stop and walk, and they have to bike slower, and
it's funner to go faster.
And you feel like you feel great, but then of course you have the repercussions afterwards.
And it's definitely worked for me over the last 4 months or so, just getting out the bike for an hour each morning at a moderately easy pace that I can do for an hour every day, and you recover well and you can get back out the next day. You're not recovering for 3 days because you push so hard.
Really important. So what sort of food? So we're talking about protein, we're talking about beautiful, eating our beautiful cows that we grow in New Zealand. Get some hate mail about that. What else do you think are great nutrient dense foods? And then what about all this concern about anti-nutrients, So, spinach, and then it's full of anti-nutrients. And
nutrient dense foods, meat, fish, seafood, veggies. And if you want to dial into that more, you can niche down into which of those foods contain more of the nutrients that you need more of, and eat more of those foods and prioritize those foods. So but the basics are just meat, veggies, and seafood. Particularly seafood is incredible if you can get it from a healthy source, with less refined grains, starches, sugars, refined vegetable oils. The amount of the increase, we've had a 600 calorie per person increase in calories just from industrial seed oils over the last 100 years. It's a massive amount of extra energy that's available just because we've worked out how to get oil from seeds from plants, from monocrop agriculture that's fueled again from the non-renewable fossil fuel fertilizers. So if you can avoid those foods, you're going to be doing a lot better, and your appetite's going to be in much better shape. Anti-nutrients, oxalates, and there's so much gnashing of teeth in an area that I think is a minor issue. Like if you're getting protein without too much energy and nutrients, then I think you're doing well. Most people find they can't tolerate too much spinach, or if they try to overdo one particular food, their gut goes, I've had enough of that, I'm on the toilet. Can you eat a little bit less spinach next time? And that's fine. Maybe you don't tolerate a lot of oxalates all at once, and maybe it's the magnesium, who knows exactly. But I don't know. Bruce Ames wrote a paper that Paul Saladino likes to quote, and basically said that every food contains some level of toxins,
Yeah.
and everything you eat, and then, Rhonda Patrick talks about sulforaphane, and she's all bang up for that and wants everybody should be eating broccoli sprouts because it creates a hormetic positive stress in your body that it adapts to. But then the carnivore scene is saying you shouldn't eat anything because all plants want to kill you, and they got daggers ready to stab you. So I don't know, I'm somewhere in between those two extremes that I think if you're eating a nutrient dense diet, I mean, if you look at oxalates, if you're getting enough calcium, magnesium, you're going to be processing your oxalates well, and your body's not going to be making excess oxalates. So most people probably need to eat veggies more than they need to be afraid of all oxalates.
And cooked and raw, do you have any preferences about?
How many veggies can you eat raw? Not a lot. So you're not actually going to get a lot of nutrients in. So if you want to eat veggies raw, then that's great. But you can't eat a lot of veggies if they're raw. You won't actually
into a smoothie and blending it up.
Yeah. But again, if you put it in a smoothie, you're not going to get the same satiety. So yeah, it just depends on your goals. If you want to get more nutrients in, then a smoothie might be a good idea. But that's a good way of getting, overdoing the.
What about the bioavailability of plant nutrients compared with?
Yeah, that's fascinating. Vitamin A, omega-3 definitely have a lower level of bioavailability from plants versus animals. But then if you're trying to eat, your food's actually got to have those nutrients in it. So like the first step is, are you getting nutrients from your diet? Where do you prefer to get your nutrients from? If you're more plant-based, I'm not going to tell you to become carnivore, and vice versa. But through your preferred dietary approach, let's try to get more nutrients. And then if the ones that you're still finding harder to get, when you quantify it, you can check it in Chronometer and say, okay, I'm struggling to get enough calcium and I'm only getting calcium from my spinach, and that's not as bioavailable, then maybe you do need some more low-fat dairy products or something to boost your calcium, etc., etc. So most people just need to get nutrients from their diet, whatever their belief system around nutrients is first, and then you can niche down into the micronutrient ratios and bioavailability. But the first step is to get it from something, and then you can dial it down from there.
With the protein, and you were talking about 55% protein really increases that satiety.
Yep.
And then, like you said, I was talking to Don Layman about it. Yep. And, we're talking about, say, 1.2 to, he's up to, 1.7, 1.8
yep.
grams of protein,
yep.
per kilogram of lean body weight. So for vegans, I find that, that's quite hard to achieve without a really high calorie load.
Yep, definitely.
And then, to get the leucine content so that you're, so that, you got muscle protein synthesis and all the other limiting protein factors that happen. And then when you look at the calorie load that you need for, soy or whatever, or, whether it's, lentils, or it's huge.
Yeah, you definitely, the protein density, the protein per calorie of plant-based foods is much lower. So if you look at, people say, the broccoli has got as much protein as beef, but how much broccoli can you get through? Not that much. And the beans, maybe lentils, good source of protein if you're a vegan. But the cod and the egg whites and the lean beef is just going to be a lot easier way to get your protein without overdoing the calories.
And do you see anything I was just reading something the other day, and I need to go back and reread it, but they were talking about, they were doing brain scans and looking at how the brain was lighting up with different groups of people with foods, and they had some vegans, and so the vegans were saying, I don't want to eat meat, but their brains were actually lighting up in a way, and so the discussion was around whether, that's a learned behavior rather than a physiological need.
I think the next frontier of nutrition is going to be understanding our cravings that aren't conscious. Like, we've got a conscious craving for salt and other flavors, but I think there's interesting work on neuropod cells in the gut that bypass your flavor senses, so you don't actually go, oh, it tastes salty. Your microbiome is going, okay, that contains potassium and amino acids and whatever that I need, and I'm satiated now. I think that's the exciting frontier of nutrition, to understand how our gut is communicating to the brain to say, yeah, that's exactly what I need. Eat more of that.
Really interesting. So can you share a couple of stories about some of the people who have been on your optimizing nutrition journey?
I just love, you chatted to Julia, who's been doing data-driven fasting for 18 months, and that uses glucose as a fuel gauge. So rather than fasting for days at a time or weeks at a time, at which point most people rebound binge, data-driven fasting just uses a simple glucometer, no CGM required, to guide when you actually need to refuel and recalibrate your hunger. So that guides people to, they quickly see how their glucose responds, and they dial back carbs because they're overfilling the carb tank, and they dial back fat because fat takes the glucose longer to drop back down again. And Julie's just done a wonderful job of going through the data-driven fasting and macros and micros, and it achieves her goal at 72 and is looking amazing and healthy. And we just get a lot of people, as Sue, who prioritize nutrient density along the lines of Dr. Terry Wiles, and was fascinated by her story about MS, and she had MS as well, and just no longer realized that she no longer needed the boxes of expensive supplements because she was getting them all from food and feels better. And we just see again and again people, when they quantify, nobody loves tracking their food, it's not that much fun, but for a period of time to track your food and say, am I getting the macros and then the micros that I need, it's just really helpful and informative. And we sort of wanted to create the tool. It just seemed like an obvious thing to do, to create a tool that showed people what foods actually contain those nutrients that people need more of, and teach them to compete in a way. They compete with themselves, and they compete for a high nutrient density score. And once they lose themselves in that process, they improve their nutrient density, and then look up and go, oh, wow, my body weight and my everything else that I was trying to improve has fallen into place. So
And what's your baseline? What's your baseline kind of values set on, like the RDI, or have you got higher baseline?
Yeah. So in terms of the micronutrient targets, that's based on analysis of the 125,000 days of data to look at what people can reasonably achieve from foods. So generally it's the 85th percentile of our nutrient optimizer population. So 15% can get more potassium per calorie than that. But you also need to get vitamin A and B12 and B3. And if you're trying to get all of those all at the same time, and the beauty of setting a limit is that most people find it fairly easy to get amino acids, especially in a macros masterclass. But then once they go into the micros masterclass, they then have to go, well, how do I get my B3 or folate, and they keep on chasing those other nutrients, but because there's a limit on how much you get rewarded in the score for everything, you sort of go, well, I don't need to focus on that, I need to focus on that. It's just an iterative process of dialing in the harder to find nutrients, and it's not a diet, it's a game basically, and it's a whole lot of fun. So yeah, those optimal nutrient intake scores are like typically 3 to 5 to 10 times what the RDI minimum to prevent diseases of deficiency are. So that's really exciting, and I hope a lot more people get excited about optimum nutrient intakes rather than the minimum to prevent diseases of deficiency, or what most people eat most of the time, and most people most of the time don't look optimal at all. So if you want to be optimal, don't go for the average or the lower end of average that those targets are set at.
That's really great work, and I guess you keep on accumulating the data, so and you can keep upgrading that process for people. It sounds like a lot of fun. It sounds
it's a lot of fun, but to communicate it is the challenge. And just, I do a blog post and write an article, and then 5 years later I come back and go, okay, I've got more data, let's try and communicate it more clearly in a way that people will understand and appreciate. And it's hard to cut through the noise when it's all about plants versus animals, or
and then
this phony sustainability thing that's all about blah blah blah, eat Beyond Burger, or
eat your whatever it was called, IG hemoglobin soy,
which nobody's promoting regenerative agriculture because it makes a lot of money. They're promoting the things that make them a lot of money, and they'll find scientific or fund scientific studies that support that.
I do keep asking people what we're going to do with the cows. Like, are we just going to go out and kill all the cows, or are the farmers going to just have to keep them and look after them?
They'll become pets
until they die of old age. I'm not quite sure. And I do wonder about India, because India has the biggest cow population in the world, but they don't eat them for meat. They use them for dairy products. What's going to happen with that? Because that must be, if you're into the cows cause methane thing, concept, well, you've got a huge problem there.
But where do you stop if you want to eliminate everything that creates methane in the world?
No, you've got to wipe out all the animals,
all the mollusks and everything else that makes methane. And as a transport engineer, I'd start with the cars. Get people out of their lounge chairs from door to door, driving from their home to their sitting in traffic for an hour.
And stop transporting our food all around the world, and
buy local and fresh.
Have you got a minute to talk about intermittent fasting?
Why not?
It's a really interesting topic, and
so
many different perspectives on it. And I see a lot of people because I see a lot of people in the community that I'm in who are really embracing intermittent fasting. And in private, I hear the horror stories about it, but the public face of it is so, really being endorsed at the moment. And so I do have concerns about people intermittent fasting for 10 days every so often, and so I'd love to hear your perspective.
I was all down the intermittent fasting rabbit hole, and was fasting for multiple days, and I was all in the keto craze and intermittent fasting craze that was really strong 5 years ago. But I think where, like Don Layman said, if IF helps you find a routine that helps you to control how much you eat, that's great. But I think most people, if you look at the studies, I was reading Mark Mattson's book and talking about rat studies, and I thought, hey, wait up. Those rats, if you starve them every other day, they still get the same rat chow every other day. Humans, you might eat your steak and veggies if you're eating 2 or 3 meals a day, but if you fast for 5 days, what are you eating at the end of that 5 days? You're not going to go, oh yeah, that chicken breast and broccoli would be fantastic, thank you, and I'll just have a little piece. I'll just have a standard meal. I was, again, into your Pix peanut butter from New Zealand, which is delicious and wonderful, and everything else just going, yeah, I deserve this. I earned it. I was good. I fasted, and I fasted for 7 days once, and you feel euphoric, and the ketones rise. But what do you eat at the end of that period? And I think a lot of people are very quickly undoing the benefits in that period of deprivation by choosing poor quality food at the end of it. And if they're, especially as Don Lehman was saying, if you're getting less protein when you eat, because you're not going to go, oh yeah, I'll just go to egg white and low fat cottage cheese or whatever at the end of your fast. Most people are eating keto, which just means I'm into the peanut butter and the fat bombs and everything to replenish the energy, but you're not replenishing the nutrients or the protein at that point. You're not rebuilding anything at that point. And we all banged on about magic autophagy, and if I fast for 8 hours, it'll give me this level of autophagy, and then at 12 hours something else magical happens, and at 18 hours another magical thing light bings up and my body goes, I'm killing cancer cells at from 18 to 19 hours. But those studies are based on Walter Longo's rats, where one mouse day is 40 human days. So to get the benefits from autophagy from his 3-day mouse fast, that's 3 times 40, which is 120 days. How many people are fasting for 120 days to get the autophagy that Walter Longo saw in his rat studies? So what we do know is that once you get leaner, once you're not obese, your cancer risk goes down, your metabolic syndrome decreases, your insulin goes down. Once you're not fat and you're strong and your waist to height ratio is better and your blood sugars are lower, it's thumbs up, you're going really well. So whatever gets you there. And I think we invented data-driven fasting to help guide people to refuel when they need to, but not fast so long that they make poor food choices. So using your blood sugar as a fuel gauge, you can wait long enough until you actually need to eat. Your hunger is validated. Great work out of the University of Otago, looked at hunger training that we sort of piggybacked off, and developed data-driven fasting that, when your blood sugar fuel gauge is low, you actually need to eat. But if you let it go too low, you choose really poorly. You make poor food choices at that point. So I think it's just important to find the balance of finding a negative energy balance, but being able to still make good food choices at the end. I'll stop ranting now, let you talk.
No, that was perfect. That was great. And I see that. I think that, like Jason Fung's population, which tend to be, really obese type 2 diabetics, there's certainly a lot more room for movement than there is in, say, maybe our colleagues who are lean and fit and exercising. And then in the general population, I kind of see it used as a way of just controlling calories. So I'm only going to eat once a day, but then it doesn't matter what I eat.
Yeah.
And I'm losing weight, but then right back to what you said about the nutrient density.
Yeah, and you're losing muscle mass. Most people, a lot of people with data-driven fasting were doing OMAD, and OMAD a lot of the time is a 6-hour window that they can drive through, or you can eat windows that they can, anything goes in that window. But a lot of people, when they get 2 meals a day rather than 1 meal a day, find they can make much better food choices. Their metabolic rate goes up, their energy goes up. They can actually get the protein they need in 2 meals a day or 3 meals a day if they're younger and more active and burning more energy. So I think just looking at your blood sugar eliminates snacking, because your blood sugar won't come back down an hour after. You have to wait actually until you need to refuel. But 1 meal a day or alternate day fasting, or 5-2, it just makes it harder and harder to get the nutrients you need, especially the protein, to prevent loss of lean muscle mass, especially in older people. Is really, really, really critically important. So you just need to find an eating routine that you can eat well when you do eat.
Yeah. And then my other thought, I agree with you about the autophagy and that process, because the reason we've got, cancer cells and things is because of our eating this, Western diet, this processed food diet with all these seed oils. So if we can eliminate that, we really reduce our risk anyway. Yeah. But thinking about the euphoria, I was talking to someone the other day about the euphoria from fasting, and I think that, to me, there seems to be like there would be a ancestral need for that, because we don't want to go back to our cave and lie down and die. So we need to have heightened awareness and senses and this drive to go and find food. And so euphoria would be a natural part of that process.
Ketones are basically rocket fuel to fuel you to go out and hunt, not lie down and die. So when you're hungry, you can go out and hunt. But a lot of people, when they do a lot of fasting and get really lean, the glucose drops, the ketones rise, and then the guy can't sleep anymore because I'm just wired overnight. So I think getting protein earlier in the day is just a really important thing at your first meal, to prioritize protein. And then if you're going to have carbs and energy, still get protein. But if you're going to have carbs, then have them later at night when your blood sugar tends to be lower, and a little bit of carbs helps with sleeping as well. So
excellent. Anything else you'd like to say to people?
You're fascinating to chat to. I really enjoyed having a yak with Susan. So it's been really fun to get to rant about nutrient density and intermittent fasting.
Well, no, it's really great to have you on, and you've got so many wonderful resources. So do you want to tell people where they can find you? And I always make sure I put everything in the show notes so people can track you down easily.
Anything under optimizing nutrition. We've got a blog with 7 years of blog posts that we're just overhauling at the moment, looking at protein sparing modified fast and trying to help people find the nuance there, and satiety and nutrient density. Got an optimizing nutrition podcast, data-driven fasting challenges that run 8 per year, and then a macros masterclass and a micros masterclass. So they're the little projects, and it's fun to play a part to help people, and I just love seeing those results.
And just another question, do you still work as a transportation engineer?
I'm very part-time since November, because the hobby took over my life.
Right, I was just wondering whether the hobby was now your full-time job or not.
I'm semi-retired now.
That's amazing. And please thank your wife for all the contribution she does as being the guinea pig and the test subject, and
she's a great supporter.
And having all her metrics put out there for the world to watch.
That's great. Thanks, Susan.
Thank you.